Welcome to Naked Reflections, brought to you from the Wolf Institute. I'm Ed Kessler, and each week I'll be taking an in-depth look at the stories reported by our friends over at the Naked Scientists. What does the latest scientific stuff mean for the rest of us? Stay with us and find out. Hello and welcome to Naked Reflections. I've always thought it's a bit of a mug's game imagining your own funeral. There's a danger that someone there may seem not so much upset as relieved. But in the Naked Reflection show Good Grief, Raymond Tallis came up with a good idea about, what shall I say, keeping up with the Boneses.
One of the most striking funerals, I think, was Ted Hughes's funeral, where halfway through his voice basically was reciting Fear No More, the heat of the sun, and so on in his wonderful poetic voice. That's the kind of intervention I think I'd like. Give everybody a fright, and when they're halfway through their drink, halfway through the service, to remind you, by the way, this is the chap you're putting away.
This week we're focusing on what happens before that funeral, to put it bluntly, getting ready to die. Perhaps it's not something most of us want to think about until it's rather too late. But thankfully, some people have given this subject serious reflection. And there's a long history of palliative care. Earlier this year, The Lancet, the international medical journal founded way back in 1823, published the findings of its Commission on the Value of Death. It examined the story of dying in the 21st century, and among the topics explored, beautifully in my view, was how life and death are bound together. Without death, it stated, there would be no life. More on the Commission later. But first, I'm delighted to welcome two knowledgeable, resourceful, and compassionate guests to Naked Reflections. Dr. Philip Lodge, consultant in palliative medicine at the Royal Free Hospital and the Mary Curie Hospice in Hampstead. A recent article described Philip as always having time to care. A great compliment to a busy man. He's joined by Ruwaida Randri, a volunteer in the daycare unit at the St John's Hospice in London for over 8 years. Ruwaida's interest is in health psychology, and she's a tutor on the long-running Wolf Institute programme Diversity in End-of-Life Care, a course which trains healthcare professionals and volunteers about religious customs and beliefs on dying, so that palliative care can be delivered with even more care. Philip, how do you help people get ready to die?
I think that many people that I speak to are struggling with the day-to-day difficulties of becoming more unwell with greater disability and the practicalities around that. The loss of self, the loss of autonomy, the feeling of being a burden on those that are caring for them, all of those are major issues. And actually the idea of death, for some, not all, is one of it will be a relief. So sometimes it's not so much the death bit, but the bit before death that we talk about. Where there is room for planning and conversations, I try to help them to prioritise really what is the most important thing that you have left to do, and to address that, and then go down the list in order of priority. And that can be very helpful. And it's not just the practicalities around making a will and so on. It can be very simple conversations that they need to have with people that they love, people that they haven't seen for a couple of years. That kind of thing can give at least some peace of mind. I don't, in my, I suppose, professional practice, talk about religion as such. I don't mention the God word. If that is a major part of someone's life, then I will happily engage my chaplaincy colleagues. I suppose what I try not to do is, cross a boundary.
Ruwaida, I saw you nodding along there.
Much of what you say makes so much of sense, I think. For me, working at the day centre in the hospice and dealing with patients when they come in when they've just been initially diagnosed with their life-threatening disease, and they could live for another 2 years or 3 years, or sometimes it could be as short as 6 months. But it's about talking about the things that are uppermost and foremost in their minds. And quite often it is just about daily living life things. It's about addressing family issues. It's about addressing relationship issues. I'd say 90% of the time, people want to talk about their relationships, about problems they've had with family members or not. it really helps in sorting this out, in talking this through, because it leads for a smoother transition into the end stages of life.
So, what are the guiding principles for you, Ruwaida? Philip's mentioned how he approaches and his concern to help patients prioritize, his concern about not crossing boundaries. What would you say are the principles that guide your work as a volunteer at St John's Hospice?
We want to address the patient's needs on an individual basis. And the guiding principles are obviously that of compassion, empathy, trust, and respect for that patient, irrespective of their ethnicity, cultural, and religious backgrounds. It seeks to offer a holistic management. So, first and foremost, address the patient's physical pain management symptoms or anything physical so that they can be at rest, and as well as satisfying their psychological, their social, and their spiritual needs. So that I would say for the dying one, as well as for their family members, because often there's a lot of insecurity for the family members as well. And I would say that the fundamental purpose is to enhance the quality of life so that the dying can continue to live their lives in a purposeful and dignified way.
So, what does that mean in practice? Because I hear very fine words and I sense the philosophy, if you like, the ethos, but listeners want to know, what does that mean?
When COVID happened and we started doing a lot of our sessions virtually with our patients, we tried to devise new things to do with them, because after a while, the conversations were revolving around pain and being lonely and isolation. So we started doing these audio biographies, which ended up being so successful because we have such, as we've mentioned previously, diverse group of people from different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds. And we started talking about life stories. So not just about the dying process and the messages that they would like to leave for their loved ones, but instead we started talking about how they came into the country, their experiences, and one story led to the next. And so a couple of them actually have done little journals and scrapbooks with their stories. We usually provide for them a USB with the stories, but some of them love writing. So they've taken and adapted their stories and written them out. And one of our patients loves drawing, and she did a little picture to complement each. And it's become a beautiful legacy to leave behind for families, because they can't tell their stories or to the future generations to come. So quite often it would come down into early discussions about death. So with the day center, when people come in at a very early stage, we can start these conversations. Firstly, there's a misconception that when someone is going to go into palliative care or into hospice care, it is all about end of life and it's about ending life. And that's often not the case, because you can continue in palliative care at the hospice while still undergoing curative treatment. So you can still go for chemo and you can still carry on whatever medical care that you need. But I think you can come in there knowing that you can talk about your spiritual needs, you're getting access to social care if that's what you need to make your life simpler and easier. You can talk about how can you attain that forgiveness within yourself and from other people as well. It allows us to plan and to be the architects of our own deaths, of our own dying, rather than leaving it to someone else to plan what our dying is going to be about. We have birth plans when we are going to have babies. We can have this as well. We can have a plan and be the architect of how we would like our end to be. Yes, it may not always follow to what we want. We can put forward our ideas of what we'd like for our ends. Another very important thing is that they are in socializing with people who are experiencing the same issues as themselves. So they don't feel this need to not talk about the elephant in the room, which is dying. They can talk about it openly and listen to experiences of other people in that room. And they forge friendships, they live lives in a holistic way, growing, learning every day. It doesn't stop if you are dying.
Philip, in the introduction, I mentioned the Lancet Commission, the study of the value of death, if you like. It's a recent report. What were the key findings for you in terms of preparing to die?
So I think there's two elements which really struck me. In my hospital practice, I pretty often frustrated and I suppose concerned about how much we do to people when they are coming towards the end of life. And actually, often when I become involved, it's very clear, by definition probably, that that's what's happening. And yet the medical team have put an enormous amount of effort in trying to stop death, meaning that they've put the person through numerous interventions, traumatic, invasive procedures, to no avail before they finally start to recognise that we need to think differently. And I think the medical approach to caring for people has come to a point now where we need to change the emphasis sooner and recognise that we aren't able to maintain life under all circumstances, and actually we shouldn't try to. And I don't mean to be critical, and I have an understanding of why it has come to this. In my 30 odd years of being a doctor, things have changed amazingly in terms of the technological advances, the different investigations and therapeutic procedures and options that have come online since I've been around are huge. And so the more choices we have, the more easy it is to make the wrong choice. I think that's an issue for us. And on top of that, information is no longer our preserve. Patients and patients' families instantly, really at the touch of their thumbs, have access to everything I have access to in terms of knowledge. And therefore demands, I think, have gone up. And if we do not do something, it is fair to say sometimes people say, you can do this, why aren't you doing it? And that's really hard to work with. I don't want to go all the way back to a lovely old-fashioned paternalistic approach. But on the other hand, I think as doctors, we need to be almost the, trying to think of the word, the preservers really of sense and realism when it comes to what we're trying to achieve with the patients. And the other aspect is outside medicine, which is the societal issue around talking and thinking about death and dying. That's a major undertaking, and obviously beyond the wit of a doctor to sort that out. But we all probably have a part to play in generating conversations and really making sure that what we're trying to do is not, how can I put it, deny treatment to people, but to actually use what we have wisely and where it will benefit the most.
I was reading one of your colleagues' books, Catherine Mannix, she's done so much of work, and she was saying that we've all become fixated on this life-preserving machinery of life. It's robbing us of being with our loved ones during the time of dying. We've forgotten what that experience is like, and we just know that our loved ones go into hospital and they die, and we never had that chance to reach a closure with them.
And I think highlighted by COVID and people dying without anyone near them.
I'd like to bring the conversation back to getting ready to die. And Ruwaida, in particular, when it comes to religious diversity, what role does religion, ethnicity, belief, national variety, what roles do they play? And do some groups find it more difficult coping?
Quite often staff were guided by their own instincts or their personal beliefs, and they felt that they hadn't fulfilled the religious needs of their patients because they are unaware of what to do. In normal circumstances, they would have reached out to chaplaincy services, or the family members obviously would have been by the bedside to be able to offer that. And in that initial lockdown in March, especially when things just went stone cold, they really experienced a lot of difficulty at that time. And then, of course, in came technology, and family members could be virtually by the bedside to instigate things. But that first period showed that there was a death in knowledge at religious end-of-life practices.
This is Naked Reflections with me, Ed Kessler. My guests this week are Philip Lodge and Ruwaida Randri, and we're talking about getting ready to die. When it comes to dying, you might think that the behavior of cells and molecules don't provide much useful guidance to us humans, and let me tell you, you're right. But it is fascinating. Here's Herman Steller on the Naked Scientist eLife show, Undead Cells.
Cells that die can stimulate other cells to die as well. This is significant because both in normal developments and in certain disease situations, large groups of cells die in a somewhat coordinated behavior, and the signal to die can be shared amongst the population, and coordinated suicidal behavior is achieved, a little bit like lemmings all jumping over the cliff. Subsequently, a number of labs showed that cells can actually release signals to stimulate cell division. That seems to make sense in a situation when a cell is lost and you want to replace it. So it's a "I'm dying, please replace me" signal.
Herman Steller with some insights into the last will and testament of cells. Does the comment, "I'm dying, please replace me," help us think about the subject of preparing for death?
I'd like to say yes. On a philosophical level, and even a realism level, we all know that that's the case. We're here for a time, and then we leave the world, either our children or those we leave behind. And that's the natural order of things. So the logic is there, and even the philosophy is there. But when it comes to one, does that really help us? I think there are some people who do find that helpful. To leave a legacy will be a great comfort to many people. But actually, for others, it's no comfort whatsoever. The reality is they're leaving the world they don't want to go. And nothing actually will make it acceptable. I do meet people who are remarkable, of course, and can deal with what's happening to them with a serenity that is not coming from any particular religious belief or cultural background. They just happen to possess it. I don't know why. And it's not correlated with age, time of life, and so on. I've seen young people with a young family look it in the eye and go with it in the most calm way. Equally, I've seen people in their 90s go out kicking and screaming because it's unacceptable. I don't know why. Could it be innate? I doubt it. Could it be something to do with the relationships that they've either had or are having that give them that ability? I don't know. Is it anything to do with me? I don't think so. As a doctor, I think, of course, the majority of what I do is around medical care, interventions that might make people's lives more comfortable. I'm a great one for using drugs. I do like a drug. But equally, I think there is an art to medicine, which is about the talking and listening, which can be of help. But are we fundamentally able to look at ourselves as temporary and that we will be replaced? Oh, I don't know, Ed. I'm not sure.
Philip, I can say that to share a story about, as you say, you don't know where the serenity comes in. And we had quite a young patient with a brain tumor, and he was religiously inclined. He was a young Syrian man. He had to have his right arm amputated, but he had the spirit, he had this will, he had this need to do something more than just accept it and die. So he took up painting, and he started literally his left hand, which is not non-dominant, started doing these lovely pictures. He had a purpose, and he did this little exhibition in the hospice and sold the money, and he felt that he wanted to give back. So he took all of this and treated all the staff to some lovely things, and he felt like he wanted to give back. It gave him his kind of purpose as well. So it's having that support and feeling that you're still worthwhile, that you can still live in a way that you can contribute. You're not just waiting to die.
It's part of that preparing to die process that is the focus, of course, of this discussion. I'm taken by the principle of the value of death. It's a remarkable phrase because we talk so much about the value of life, but the value of death, and without death, there can be no life. And so the example you gave, Ruwaida, of someone painting towards the end of their life, giving that value in the end of life stage. Philip, you mentioned you're a fan of drugs. Just unpack that a little bit in terms of justifying palliative sedation.
So sedation at the end of life is something that we will practice, where the only way to maintain comfort is to allow someone to be asleep. I think if we didn't have qualms about that, then we shouldn't be practicing. So when we come to that point, I think it's very important to get the views of the team that are involved, and indeed make sure that the patient's family, because listen, in almost every case, by that time, the poor patient themselves is unable to participate in that conversation. But to get the family together and actually explain why we're doing what we are doing. It is sometimes extremely hard for a family to go with that. They want to have every opportunity to have every last bit of communication with that person, and they don't want it to be in any way tunted or restricted. However, I think the majority of families will say whatever you need to do to keep them comfortable, do. I think we must be really clear that the intent is to allow them to be peaceful while they die, and it is not to speed up their death. That must be really clear. I think it's only fair to say, in all honesty, we do not know whether how we manage that does hasten death, or indeed whether it prolongs their death. Because if someone is using energy and using fluid by being agitated physically and in distress, then I feel if you don't treat that, there's a theoretical chance that they will die more quickly. Whereas if they're sleeping peacefully, not using energy, not using water, then they may actually be with us longer. Now, I'm not going to say that that's a truth. It's a theory. We can't do a study to prove it either way. But sometimes that's a helpful conversation, put nicely, to have with family members. I think obviously there is an ongoing debate about assisting people to die in some form in the UK, and clearly that practice is spreading around the world. I'm not somebody who is strongly advocating a change in the law. I think the arguments for and against often are flawed and are not from the point of view of the people who are actually dying. And that's the important thing to recognise. It's all fine and dandy having a general public opinion poll, but that's the irrelevant audience. We need to talk to the people who are going through it and listen to them.
Philip, I was just going to say, coming back on your point on the early conversations about death and the experiences, it's quite often that we are getting our own experiences about death vicariously. We don't know what it's like to be dying. So we're getting it from, TV programs, dramatizations, we're getting it from social media. And quite often, this is not what death is like. It's overplayed or it's underplayed. And the sensitivities of dying are not put across. And having these conversations early on with patients, I think, provides us with them with the opportunity of, and the family, loved ones, working through the different stages of how death will progress. Because like you say, it's necessary sometimes for there to be sedation or for the pain to be taken away. But if these conversations are brought in earlier, we can put those plans into place rather than when the patient is already distressed and distraught and then trying to make these decisions.
I agree. And it's not uncommon for us to have that conversation with patients about what's going to happen. They ask and we answer. And sometimes I put it along the lines of, I hope that this is reassuring if I tell you that if things get to such a pass that the only way to help you is to allow you to be asleep. I hope that's helpful. And I think most of the time it is. I think one of the difficulties for us as a clinical team is where the patient is still able to express their feelings and explain what they want and what they don't want. And they say to me, can you sedate me now? And that's a really tough one. I have to say along the lines of, yeah, but you're not ill enough yet. You're not dying enough yet. Sometimes that is actually something they laugh at, which is reassuring, not always.
That element of humour seems to be so important in so many aspects of the Naked Reflections podcast over the years. Humour has been something that's crossed boundaries and has enabled you to reach people in unexpected ways. I wonder, Ruwaida, whether that's also played out in the volunteer work that you're doing at St John's, when humour is, and I guess there are times, of course, when we make a joke or make a remark and it's just the exact opposite of what we should do. But is it helpful?
Yes, I think it is helpful because people are still people and it's not all about being serious all the time. Everyone needs to forget as well. And we just need to live like normally rather than focusing only on one point all the time. And so, yes, we have a laugh and a joke and we have the newspapers out and we have a big debate and we have big discussions and we have a laugh, talk about, things. You can't always be serious. That's not the point of living, and a person has to continue living. So, and can't be done solemnly.
And I suppose that's important for both of you too, isn't it, Philip? That ability to laugh even at the moments when you're feeling most drained and exhausted?
Honestly, don't know what anyone would do without humour. Oh gosh, I think I need to be really careful and say that, you know, within the team, both in the hospice and the hospital, we laugh, hopefully appropriately, and not in a way that will raise a complaint for overdoing frivolity. Honestly, even in the patient's rooms, it is a really important aspect. I think I have some kind of stock phrases, some stock issues that I like to talk about with particularly patients' families in that last period of life for the person they love. I can walk into a room, there will be a few people sitting around a bed, and the person in the bed is no longer able to take part in the conversation. And I don't know if I've interrupted. I say, I'm really sorry to disturb you. Just want to see, you know, how you're all doing. And we have a conversation. And I like to say, if I was in the bed, do you know what? I'd want you to be talking about normal stuff, ridiculous stuff, stupid memories, and laugh. And it's okay. And I think that's what would comfort me, and hopefully that's what would comfort them. And almost always they all say, absolutely, yeah, that's what we've been doing, and we will carry on doing that. And it's vital. I can confess, I went to see a patient after they died in the hospice once. I knew them quite well, and I knew the family quite well. They were very, shall I say, easy family from a team perspective, and also just lovely. So I walked in and I said hello, and they were all there having a cup of tea, you know, sitting with the person that died. And I walked up to him, and I always say hello to them. I never don't speak. I said, oh, hello, it's only me, just come and say goodbye. And I looked at him, and then I looked at the family, and I said, do you know what? He looks a lot better now than he did yesterday. And they all fell about laughing. Now, I'm very lucky, because it could have gone badly, but it just came out. And they agreed. He did. He looked a lot better. So humour can be incredibly helpful. And I do employ it, hopefully, most of the time, in the right places. But it's almost something that we should be, I don't know, trained at medical school. Stand-up comic, improv. I mean, I'm sure I could talk for hours. We better not. I've told my youngest son which track to play out everybody at my funeral. I've told him not to let anyone leave until the very end of the song. Track 14 on Exile on Main Street. Brilliant.
In that case, I'm going to follow your example and tell you that this podcast has had its allotted time. Thanks very much to my guests, Philip Lodge and Rueda Randri, and thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you might also enjoy listening to our archive of podcasts, which include dialogues about mental health, silence, peace, and a lot more. And feel free to check out other podcasts from the Woolf Institute or from our friends at the Naked Scientists. There's plenty more to come too, because I'll be back next week with new guests.